What's up, fellow travelers? Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm your host, Sam, and this week I have a special interview with the writer for Closure Encounters, Romy Loor. Romy's been on the show before. She wrote Ben's song for the Defense in season 1. It was her first episode ever of television, and this marks her second. So super excited to be able to have that conversation with her last season. Just her approach, everything that she'd learned, and talking about the story and the story beats as well. It was a lot of fun, and I think you having her back, honestly, this conversation was just as fun, just as informative, maybe even better in some ways. And the episode itself, I really, really enjoy. You can, of course, check out the review of that episode if you haven't done so already, and then head back over here for the interview, or vice versa. Either way, they're perfectly wonderful companions, or just watch one and forget the other. But if you're only going to watch one, I encourage you to watch the interview with Romy Loor. And I think you're really going to enjoy this a lot. There's some wonderful tidbits and insight into the episode. Things that were in earlier drafts that changed out of necessity, or because maybe there was a better way, and just a lot of really great stuff about the construction and crafting of this specific episode, as well as the introduction of Hannah. And we can't talk too much, obviously, about Hannah. Certainly not where she's going, but there's some lovely stuff anyway. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Romy Loor. I'm just going to send it over now. So here she is. Romy, hello. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Sam. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Good to be back
Excellent.
in the room.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I had so much fun, last time around talking about Ben's song for the Defense, and definitely, I think that episode stood out for a lot of people, and there was some great stuff in there, and particularly the interactions between like Ben and Jen. I remember being something that everybody really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to talking about Closure Encounters. It's probably one of my favorites of the first 5 now, because I've seen the first 5. Really, really enjoyed it, and there's just a lot of great stuff that happens. And it's wonderful. One of the things we were talking about briefly off mic is that there's some wonderful kind of setup for 4, but it doesn't feel like setup, which is really nice. Like, it tells kind of this emotional story on its own between Ben and Addison. But before we hop into all of that, it has obviously been a different kind of summer, I know, for a lot of the writers, and you're the first writer that I've gotten the chance to speak to. So what was your time during the strike like, and how are you feeling now being back?
It was funny, like the first couple of weeks, and we're all out on the picket lines together, but production was still running. And we all just kind of felt very useless, as when it comes to being a writer. And it felt a little bit but like being in COVID again, because we suddenly had nothing to do.
Sure.
And like our little world of our writer's room had suddenly stopped, and there was no other work to be going onto. So it was a bit of an adjustment, but I think everybody kind of handled it and did their own thing. Me personally, I didn't have the financial capital to wait out the whole time, so I returned to what do they call it, the backup gig, or the side gig.
Right.
So,
Yeah, one of the things too that's so interesting about the process for Quantum Leap in particular is that you all were working on the show, on season 2 while season 1 was still going on, basically. What was that process like? Because I don't think we've really had a chance to talk, obviously, since the finale. Working kind of alongside what's happening towards the end of season 1 while also trying to break stories for season 2. I'd heard that the room had kind of been divided in order to sort of divide and conquer the work. Is that kind of how it happened?
Yeah, I mean, it just felt like one really long season, So the way production is set up, on a network show, when you've got the room running at the same time as production, it is a divide and conquer. One person's writing a script, another's writing an outline, one's on set with their episode shooting, and whoever you happen to have left is in the room breaking, the next episode to be broken. So it kind of always is that kind of divide and conquer situation. What was great about going straight into 2 is when you're picking up again in a room, it's like, okay, and there's always that like finding your rhythm and finding your feet. And like by the time we'd done 18 episodes of season 1, we had our groove. So we actually broke the first handful of episodes really fast. So it was great in that respect.
Yeah, I think it shows because there's definitely a momentum. I feel like that these first few episodes already have that, like you said, sometimes when you're coming back, it's like, it's just sort of like, okay, we're maybe tiptoeing back into these storylines and, refreshing memories. But obviously there's also the big change. So I'm curious, what was your reaction, especially going from season 1 directly into season 2 in the work, when Martin was like, everything's going to change. 3 years are going to pass. They're going to declare Ben dead. Addison's moved on.
Well, we knew that long before the second, the room started for season 2.
Okay.
It was like, because it was mostly all the same writers. And, I had written an episode, I was still quite close, with the room and the day-to-day happening. So, everybody kind of knew the trajectory for season 2, as we kind of know where we might go for season 3. At least the beginnings are,
Nice.
Yeah, if there is,
Sure, right. Well, I mean, at this particular point, I just want to see other things resolve so we can, everybody can get back to work. Because in addition to, of course, having, done those first 8 of season 2, now that the WGA strike has resolved, you're back working on the back 5 of season 2. So yeah, being back, what's that been like now that you're back to work?
It was great. And we did this big lunch together, and funnily enough, it was the first time we'd had everyone together in person.
Wow. That's right, because a lot of stuff is and a lot of stuff you've done has been through Zoom, right? Like that's how you kind of did the writer's room. Yeah.
So
that's
we actually
fascinating.
All met in person and had a kind of download and a debrief and a celebration. We were happy. We were happy that it was over and we can move forward. And there was hopeful more resolution on the horizon. Yeah.
It's it's interesting because I think sometimes for the most part, I've seen just overwhelming support for both of the strikes, which has been great. But every once in a while, you do get some of those naysayers. And I think that one of the things that was certainly misconstrued by that small portion of people that were, talking about it is that there was every desire to get back to work. Like people wanted to be working. And in particular, with what I've been able to hear about Quantum Leap, like there was just so much excitement over what you all had already done and established for the second season that you were eager to get back in there and, kind of start to finish things up for the season. Do you feel like the momentum that you kind of had for those first 8 has carried over now into these last 5?
We're finding our feet again.
Sure.
Well, the great thing is we'd already gotten so far on the last 5. We talked about the stories of most of them and knew what the story of the week was going to be, and so we'd already done a lot of work. It was just kind of revisiting and refreshing, and then we were able to keep cracking away at it.
Yeah. While while the strike was occurring, were there any kind of ideas that came to you or anything that you were thinking about during that time that just made you so excited? It's like, I want to get back to work so that I can throw this out there, or, we can have this conversation.
No, I think the mentality is, you're on strike. So that kind of part of your brain is like, I have to shut that off, or I have to, focus my creativity on something else. So I worked on other things, but, it was just such a, you're out there picketing and just like, you don't you would even feel guilty if you're like in your own head just thinking of ideas for
Sure.
the show. It's like, no, you're meant to be on strike, you're not meant to be working.
Right, right. Well, it's funny because even as a total outsider, just looking in and just producing this podcast, where I get to talk about the show, there was definitely a period of time where I mean, even I felt that. So I think that that's something that's very easy to understand because there were a lot of people that were questioning, how can I talk about the show? Should I talk about the show? What should I say if I do talk about the show? And so I think that that's been kind of the fascinating thing for a lot of creative types, even people that aren't union members, when it comes to conversations surrounding the entertainment. It's sort of like, what can we say about this art that we love so much, and when and how should we say it? So it's I do, I think that that's easy to understand, actually. So moving into season 2, and obviously already kind of knowing about the time jump and the breakup between the characters, what was it like, the process, knowing that you're going to be working on episode 3, or rather, when did you find out that you would be working on episode 3?
My memory is a little foggy. It was such a like a train, like a full bullet train from like through season 1 and season 2. I think it was like the first week of the room or second week of the room for season 2. So it was like the first week of January.
Okay.
We kind of it would they told us who was going to write the episode through 13.
Okay.
So I forgot the question.
Oh, no, it was just basically, it was when you found out that you were going to be working on 3.
Right,
So
that
that answers it. So at the mercy of your foggy memory, I am curious, was the story always going to be sort of this, I guess we can give everything away and people have seen the episode already, but was it going to be this sort of quasi UFO paranormal episode, also tied to, of course, this very grounded kind of real story and the military mischief surrounding it? Was that always sort of a part of the episode?
Yeah, so I think coming into season 2, we just really wanted the first handful of episodes to all be really different and all be really engaging and exciting, and be more kind of either genre spectacular, kind of very strong, right, in its choices, rather than some of those very character based, family based episodes like my first one was last year, like Ben's Song for the Defense.
Yeah.
So that was a very specific choice, and I think like I didn't choose this theme. Like I didn't choose aliens, UFOs. That was set for the episode. I think the bank robbery was set for 2, and hang on, have I spoiled anything? No. And
Nope.
Martin I was like, where am I? Martin had already had the idea of what he wanted to do with the premiere.
Okay.
So those first 3 were set. Yeah.
Okay.
And we always try to keep them grounded, though, So
yeah, well, one of my favorite aspects of the story is, there's this wonderful relationship that develops between Ben and the sheriff, and of course that plays right to the heart of the story because the sheriff's granddaughter is, kind of at the center of everything that's happening. So when approaching this story, which does have that kind of spectacle, right, this sort of like almost retro X-Files kind of feel to it. When you're looking for that added layer, what do you find to kind of be the way into that? Is that something that's born out of discussions? Is that something that's kind of already really baked in, or, do you come to it later?
No, it's definitely when we're breaking it in the room. Some of the biggest discussions, outside of plot, for the episode is always like the character arcs and the character dynamics of the episode.
Yeah.
And, this was a tough one, actually, because it was really hard when breaking it in the room to go, okay, is the granddaughter our lead and our protagonist, outside of Ben, or is it the sheriff? And it was kind of, at a certain point, it was meant to be more Korey. Then it was about their relationship and like repairing that. And then as like we got towards the final script. It was like really it became more about the sheriff because Ben was spending the most time with the sheriff, and so while Korey and their relationship are elements and important, this is like the person we have to be really rooting for in this episode is for the sheriff to succeed in saving Korey.
Yeah. I mean, I think it works really, really well. And I think that, the actor who plays the sheriff, Lewis Hertham, oh gosh, I hope I got that right, does a wonderful job. And I just love what he brings to the episode because it genuinely feels very different from a lot of other characters, guest characters that we've seen prior on the show. And I love the chemistry, obviously, with Ben. Speaking of chemistry with Ben, of course, one of the other elements that's kind of really central to this episode is the relationship between Ben and Addison. And while we've certainly seen them in conflict before, it's always been as a result of something that Ben has leaped to save her, and she's frustrated because she doesn't understand what's going on and that sort of stuff, whereas this is obviously a very different kind of conflict between the two of them. When approaching the relationship as it is now compared to what it was last season, what was important to get across?
I think understanding clearly, letting the audience understand where Addison's at because they haven't seen the past 3 years. So that's really tough because Caitlin's so great and she brought this levity to it and in trying to be positive, in the way her character always is. But we didn't want that to come across as like cold or malice or, unfeeling or, so it's just like we had to be so careful. Ben, it was the next day essentially for him, right? There's no change in character other than the new information he receives, right, in the episode, which is a huge emotional shock. Then his change is going to happen, right? So I think that was a tough thing, like trying to figure out tonally and emotionally what to do with Addison because of that, because the audience isn't privy to those 3 years.
No, that's an excellent point. And I think that it's very successful. Early on in the episode, there's a scene between the two of them in a car, and Ben kind of has what could potentially be this throwaway line about dressing up at Halloween together. And their reactions from both of them really convey a lot of that story and the uncomfortability. And it feels, to me anyway, it feels like something that I think anyone who's been through a breakup and still had to be around or work with, your ex in any capacity, I think people will get that. I know I certainly got that. I was like, yeah, that's what it feels like. So, again, with their relationship being where it is and Ben kind of rebelling against her guidance in a lot of ways, it feels to me that it could be, and obviously, I mean, I think Ray is fantastic. So I think that it makes it maybe a little easier perhaps, but without the material, he can't be fantastic. So how do you kind of thread that needle between keeping your hero likable and empathetic while also being able to indulge in that anger, which is very real?
I think it helped because in the first, half of that episode, the character is not wanting to deal with it. So he's putting up the blinders and it's like, I just need to do the leap. And it was like it's a flip on its head because, all of last season, Addison's like, just focus on the leap. Don't get distracted. And now he's like, I have to focus on the leap. I can't get distracted, So I think that was really easy. And that was kind of, it was more of a choice to go that direction because there's so much other stuff going on in this episode. And so we wanted to kind of delay that kind of Ben Addison confronting this elephant for the first time a little bit. So that was a choice we did. And then, it actually was delightful how easily it played into the episode, especially in the second half where because he's in shock, because he's emotional, but he's trying to shut it down, it's leading him to make really bad decisions,
Yeah.
and like being reckless,
Yes.
So yeah, it just, yeah, it worked well.
That was really, really fascinating to see the character go to that place and be reckless, because we hadn't seen that a lot prior to
Mm-hmm.
this. So much of what Ben has done has been fairly measured, and he's had a very, he's had a lot of help too, because he's listened to Addison. And in this case, it's so the opposite. But it all worked really, really well. How much of something like that do you think is and I think they have to work together ultimately as collaborative, but how much of that do you think is the actor, and how much of that do you think is the writing?
I think it's both. Um, there's definitely, it was definitely intended to take that journey, but there are some parts within the episode it was like, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't expect them to peak emotionally. I intended that as much more reserved, and it works, and
Yeah.
that's part of the delight of the process, is like the not every scene has to be the way it was in my head, right? And it's like they
Right.
know the characters better than I do to a certain extent, because it's their, it's their, you know, um, it comes from them, and
Yeah.
they need to put part of them into, they need to take what's off the page, and and give voice and
Yeah.
give to it, and it's delightful and interesting um, to see, the different takes on it. And
For sure.
yeah, there was one scene, the scene in the hotel room, and um, in my head, I'd written it as much more kind of desperate and withdrawn, and he actually got quite fiery with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, is that too early? Is that too early? But it was just fantastic, because
Yeah.
it's fantastic. So yeah, but it's always interesting to see that, like those little changes that come through emotionally. Mm.
I love that. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about, the art form, whether it's, film, television, or theater, is that sense of discovery and wonder and surprise that can constantly occur.
Mm.
My background being in theater, it's a little bit, maybe more, it's different. You're not in front of a camera, and you don't necessarily have that immediate feedback from the other artists or whatever, but it's, but yeah, that feeling, that vibe is very much something that I love about it. So shifting gears just a little bit, there is, of course, and it's basically been spoiled, so I feel like I can say this. Whereas before, I wanted to be very careful before I said anything. But we do, of course, get introduced to a recurring character in the course of this episode, and that's Hannah. And I think, I mean, Eliza Taylor is fabulous in
Mhm.
the role, and at this point, I've seen her just in this episode. I can't wait to see more.
Mhm.
So when, knowing obviously with the changes that were occurring, the time jump and everything, and that there were going to be two new characters introduced, um, what was the approach to a character like Hannah? And I know that there's only so much you could say, but I'm very curious as to what the approach was, at least specifically for this episode, to bringing her into the show.
Well, what I will say with this episode is introducing a new character, connected with Ben. We didn't want to detract from his emotion and his huge conflict at the moment, which is his still reeling because his fiance is with another person. And that
Yeah,
is and we wanted to make sure we serviced that without it making him seem like he's flirting or hitting on somebody, or
of course.
anything like that, and because she's a female character, so we wanted to be careful that on how we played those interactions. Mm.
Yeah, well, I think it's incredibly successful, because I don't get the sense that there's really anything flirtatious whatsoever. It's wonderful. Some of the responses that Ben has, and some of the looks like on Ray's faces, as she's talking, are instead sort of this sense of kind of, there's a little bit of intrigue, there's a little bit of wonder, but ultimately I feel like where it ends in the episode, he does what Ben does, which is he supports someone else in this really wonderful way, and encourages someone else to like make a choice for the better. Like it's this really lovely kind of, it's not the point of the leap, but you get the sense that like maybe he's there to do something for her as well, and that's kind of what he does. That first scene though, with the two of them in the cafe, I mean, again, it's got to be kind of that marriage of acting and writing, but she's so, you know, she's just so magnetic, and she's so enjoyable to listen to. How much of a risk is there in bringing in a new character and, you know, making them too likable, or of course not likable enough? Like, how do you find kind of that spot where they just feel right? Because I feel like genuinely, I mean, the yeah, all the scenes with her sparkle, and I was really impressed.
You know, I think that is an eternal question of television. It doesn't matter what is on the page, that a show can like live or die on how likable somebody is on screen, you know.
Yeah.
And Eliza's fantastic, you know. So.
Yeah. I'm incredibly impressed with her, and again, she brought something. I think the wonderful thing about the episode is that there's definitely this energy, and there's a lot of angst over the course of the episode, and there's some sadness that gets played with as well. But you know, she injects something completely different, like tonally, into the episode, and it feels. The nice thing is as much as what I said earlier about Ben kind of supporting her, you know, by saying, hey, you should go check out this program at Princeton, is I think he derives some support from her kindness and her kind of openness with him, and her sense of humor. I think that is something that kind of helps him a bit as well. Which again is just really, really nice. Was there ever a question of her debuting in a different episode, or was it always going to be in this episode?
No, it was always going to be in this episode. Yeah.
Okay. How excited are you for the rest of her appearances?
Well, I'm not excited anymore. I've seen them.
That's fair. But let me ask that. Let me rephrase that. Do you think that there's a lot more to look forward to for fans of the show with her being a part of it now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever I'll move on now. Was there ever any question of whether or not the UFO and alien involvement would actually be, you know, that science fiction realm, like actual aliens, or was it always going to be like a military project and that was always a part of the story?
You know, we sometimes love to tip the hat, like in our Halloween episode from the first season. It was just like, is it, isn't it? But I think the world that this show lives in has to be grounded, because as soon as you start going, oh, there's aliens, and then you know, and the next one there's like, oh, Casper the Ghost exists. I don't know, whatever it is.
Sure.
Sorry. You know, you start breaking down the walls of the world you've created, you know, and it's great to use that as a tool when you're going to expand the world. But if you're doing that on, you know, in a show where it's not playing into the weekly existence of this world we've created, I think it doesn't serve the show. You know, it feels less grounded.
Yeah.
So you always want to maintain that. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think that there are a couple of episodes even of the classic series that I know that I struggle with because they do that. You know, there's one with like, you know, a mummy returned to life. There's a, you know, a ghost story. And for me, those are harder for me to connect with because on the overwhelming majority, the show was so grounded. And so I completely get that. Speaking of the classic series, there is an episode of the classic series Starlight Starbright that deals with you know, the potential for like alien abduction and UFO sightings and that sort of stuff, and it's set in Starlight, New Mexico. Was there any correlation between those two at all?
What was
the originals? Excuse me, let me rephrase that. The original's not set in Starlight, New Mexico, but this one being set in Starlight, New Mexico, and the title of the previous episode being Starlight Starbright. I'm just wondering. I don't really care, if I'm being completely honest with you, but I know there are people out there that want me to ask that question, so I'm asking it.
First of all, I don't even remember what the town was called in my episode. that was one of those things where we actually had, I can't even remember what name we had been using, but we used a name of a place in New Mexico. And, we kind of got to the point of like, this town we've created, we don't want people to create a correlation between the real town that exists and the town we've created, it's just like, and we've always kind of been careful about that. It was like, we want to tip our hat to things in history. We don't want to recreate things from history,
Yeah.
And so we literally, it was unfortunately the most least creative way is we had to go through clearances, right? And so we had to clear the name of the town because it was going to be used on, the diner or the hotel or whatever. So it was literally like, think of a couple names, we'll see what clears. So,
that's great.
So sorry to disappoint.
No, it's sometimes practicality wins out. Like I totally get it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, again, knowing that there's going to be, one of the things that I enjoy about the episode is that obviously starting off, I think that there are a lot of, especially viewers who approach the show like a science fiction show. Because that's the wonderful thing I think about Quantum Leap is that you have viewers who come in for that sort of sci-fi element. You have viewers that come in for the more grounded sort of story of the week element. You have people that come in for the, the meta plot or whatnot. But one of the things I love about the episode is that it certainly plays to, the possibility of there being some sort of alien existence involved. Then, of course, it's all about the, the town baddie running drugs, but ultimately it ends up being something else entirely. So when you're kind of planning those little, those little swerves into the story, is there ever any reticence? Do you always want to make it a little bit more twisty, or sometimes is there a desire to make it more of a straight line?
I mean, it's not fun when it's a straight line, is it?
No, it's not.
And, I think early on, it was just like in the room, we was having conversations of like, okay, Carrie saw something in the sky. What is it? We need to decide what it is. And I was like, it could be military. It could be a helicopter. It could be a plane. It could be a UFO. It could be military testing UFOs. So it was like, there's a limit to what it could be. And so then it was like trying to choose the order that makes most sense in terms of what you're revealing. It's just like, we when are we seeing the alien with 3 green eyes that we later realize is a soldier with night vision goggles? And, when are we passing out that information that allows us to go, oh, well, it could still be this or this, until, 4th act was like, okay, we know what it is.
Yeah. One of the other things that's kind of interesting and almost parallels that journey is that, Ben gets put through the ringer a lot in this episode, like physically, like he gets beat up, and drugged and captured. And, when you take your lead character and you do that sort of stuff to them, obviously it parallels, I think, kind of that emotional state that he's in and pays off the reckless quality that he's currently, that stage that he's in. But was there ever any kind of like fear of, are we hurting him too much? Are we stretching things too thin here, that our hero is going to get, this beat up and still be able to kind of save the day at the end?
I think there was, because there was originally when he was kind of hit by huntsmen at the end of, what is it, Act 2, when they come and hit him in the street. We had a scene, it was back in the hospital being stitched up kind of thing very early on. I was like, well, we don't want him hurt that much because he needs to keep moving, and it's very early in the episode. So yeah, there's always a conscious like, okay, no, he can only be hurt enough that he can continue,
For sure. Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about episode 2 in the first season, it's made very explicit a couple of times that Ben, even though they're occupying kind of that same space with the quantum entanglement, that Ben has the physical qualities of whoever he's slept into. So, he's the boxer, or he's the out of shape dad, and, and that sort of stuff. In episode 2 of this season, it's fascinating because at one point, as Lorena, the grandmother, he like breaks down a wall and, uses the excuse for like, oh, Pilates. I'm curious, is there anything that's, if you can even say anything, is there anything that's changed about his abilities? And was there any kind of notion over the course of this episode as he's being physically harmed that, oh, this is going to be something that Ben has to deal with, not just the Leapy?
Oh, interesting. No, there hasn't. But
Okay.
yeah, I like that concept that
Yeah.
he's beginning to entangle with his hosts' bodies a little more.
Right.
And
Well, I
be
mean, hey, after 3 years of like bouncing around, who knows what is, what's happened, right? And with what we come to learn, oh, I can't say that yet. But yeah, there's, no, it is interesting to me that that I don't know, there was just something again about him, physically being kind of tortured, for lack of a better word, that it resonated not only on that level of the emotional distress he was under, but just thinking about the implications down the road and what
Mhm,
that might mean. Because we've heard time and again, if Ben dies on the leap, he dies.
mhm,
And so it's always interesting to see him kind of placed in those threatening positions.
mhm.
Because oddly enough, I feel like we've not really physically speaking, we've only seen him like in real physical pain, a few times over the course of the series thus far. Um,
I mean, he got shot in 16, didn't he? In the
oh,
mental health, like the mental hospital, psychiatric hospital
that's
episode.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'd forgotten about that actually. Thanks for keeping me honest. But last week I forgot Sam Beckett's birth year, and I was reminded of that promptly, which I appreciated. I spaced it, but anyway. So with kind of where this episode leaves the relationship between Ben and Addison, and going into episode 4, which we can't talk about,
Mhm.
but was there any was there ever any desire to sort of wrap things up in the course of this episode as far as their relationship goes, and say like, okay, we've told this story, we're going to move on to other things? Or was it always kind of the idea that this relationship is going to need time?
No, we always knew it was going to need time because the whole first season is he leaped to save her.
Yeah.
So we can't spend one episode going, "Oh, you're with someone else." Okay, no worries.
Right,
You know,
right.
it's just like the whole season arc is, him saving the love of his life. So we're going to
Yeah.
have to spend time trying to resolve that rift.
Yeah. There's something, and I could just be making this up in my head, but there does seem to feel something already, which is a testament, I think, to being able to change gears so quickly from what the work that had already occurred on season 1 and then going right into season 2. But there's something that does feel very different about season 2 already from season 1. And
Mhm.
part of that also is that there's certain things that feel a little bit more grounded. And I think that's probably benefited from season 1. These characters are established, we know who they are. Now we can really kind of dive in with some
Mhm.
of this stuff. But has that been a conscious choice to really kind of dive in and lean into like who these people are, what's what they want, what's in their way, how do we really explore these human beings, as opposed to why did Ben leap, what's he trying to save Addison from, what getting into kind of all the meta plot and the mystery box
Mhm.
stuff?
Yeah, I think the beauty of like having season one out the way is that, like you said, we've gotten past all the basic exposition, and so once you know the character dynamics and the relationships and their history, you're able to, and you create a big change for them all. You're able to live in that change and allow them to live in that, and you know, grow from it. So yeah, it was just such a brilliant idea of Martin's to,
Yeah.
on for 3 years. It really was.
I think it works so well, and it's provided a lot of really just wonderful character drama and intriguing places to go. Um, we haven't talked too much about the project. So when approaching writing what's happening kind of current day, and with everyone, back in the present, or I guess technically speaking, the future now, what's kind of the approach to, like you said earlier about Addison and the 3 years and what's happened to her in the meantime, about
Mhm.
also kind of investing Jen and Ian and Magic with that same idea that, it's been 3 years for them.
Yeah, you're going to learn that they've all changed, and all of them have gone through things in those 3 years. Things have happened that will come up for us this season. So
Yeah. I think that when we see them in episode 2, we see things in a very different light because, they're getting the team back together and, there's these obstacles with the FBI. Tom kind of saves the day. And it's really just about like trying to, get things back together. This is the first episode where we see them kind of functioning as that team. Were there any kind of obstacles into working on that aspect to not make it feel too much like season 1, or did it kind of just feel like, oh, these people are going to slip right back in and be able to do the work?
No, I don't think that was ever a concern because we know, we had discussed as a room was like what happened in those 3 years, and some of the stuff that's happened in those 3 years will come up this season. So
nice.
Yes,
it will. Yes, it will. I'll leave it at that. Well, I again, I really enjoyed the episode, and I think that it may very well be my favorite of the first 3. I really, really liked the premiere. This took too long quite a bit as well. It was just a very different kind of story from what we'd seen before. But this episode, I think one of the things that I enjoyed so much is that it moved things forward, but it also felt very much, it took us a little bit back to, some of those really strong story of the week episodes of season 1, whereas the first 2 episodes had been about, so much other stuff. Did you feel like at any time that, kind of similarly to what I was saying about the team, did you feel like at any time that there was, you had to maybe play against any instincts that you might have had coming out of season 1, or was it just kind of easy to move on because you knew, where things were going?
No, it was easy to move on. We knew where things were going. I think it was, we're always cutting our episodes back for time. So there's a storyline that was in, a headquarters storyline that was in mine that was kind of cut out. So, but I don't miss it because it's going to be revisited later anyway. So I think that also allowed this episode to spend more time in the leap. It felt like, one of those leaps that you really get to live in because we had to, for time, cut back some of the HQ stuff.
Yeah. The finish of kind of the leap mission when Ben suggests that they move things to Area 51, that's a lot of fun, and I'm just kind of curious, where that might have come from, and was it again just having fun and wanting to do something like that? Yeah.
We always do to the hat, it was just like
right.
Yeah,
it's the old show. They had the kisses with history where like Sam would interact with a famous person or whatever, and I love the way that in the revival that you all have found ways to do that same thing, but maybe not so explicit as like oh, you just taught Buddy Holly the lyrics to Peggy Sue or Michael Jackson how to moonwalk, which is fine, which is great. But it's also, it fits well with that show. I don't know necessarily that having Ben, teach Chubby Checker the twist would work as well in this show. Well, I'm curious to know, what were your favorite parts of the episode?
I think just surviving the episode. It was like one of those cursed episodes. It wasn't cursed, but it was just, we got the like weather. So we were out at Disney Ranch for a lot of it, and we, it was like earlier in the year when it was raining a lot, and we had this like lightning storm. We had to, if there's lightning, set shuts down because it's not. We've got so much metal everywhere, like in production and tents and stuff. We shut down. So it's like we were up against it. And we had, it was a very kind of, it was set, set in 49. So we had very limited kind of sets and a lot to do. We had UFOs and UFO chases and car chases, and, it was just a lot. And I think our director, Chris Grismer, really did an amazing job with kind of like the budget that we work with, and then the amount of content on the page, and like making sure we got it all. And then, it's just like, in creating an alien, and then creating a UFO ship, and then creating the real version, that Ben would have seen if he wasn't high on whatever mystical drug the
Right.
military was using, So it was a big episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
It
was.
feels big. It really leans into that kind of like you're making a mini movie every week, basically, and it's just a testament. Again, I've said this before, but to the work that the crew is able to do and transform on a week to week basis. You don't have. I mean, obviously there's the project, but that's separate. But you don't have that home based set every week
Mhm.
for these episodes, or
Mhm.
something nondescript that you could do. Everything's got to feel real and lived in, and
Mhm.
it's pretty incredible, the work that
Yeah,
gets
it's
done.
such a delight as a writer to be in the room. I was like, where are we going this week? What can I even imagine? We get as much fun and enjoyment out of it as the audience does, which is like that wish fulfillment and a new adventure every week.
Mm.
The poor crew are the ones that have to make it all come to life.
Well, they do a very good job. So,
They do a fantastic job, yeah.
I want to wrap up here in a little bit, but I do have another question that I'm very interested in because I don't feel like I've actually been able to ask this question like on the record before. Once the show is, the episode that you've written is in production and, they're shooting it, what is your job like at that point? And how much input do you have, like kind of on a day-to-day basis, if there's anything that might need to change or whatnot?
I'm on set.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're not always on set. Sometimes, with the dividing and conquering, other people cover set and other people's episodes and whatnot. But for this episode, I was on set. Yeah. So there were a couple of circumstances where we were kind of changing things on the fly. But the beauty of it is that I was on all the scouts, it is in particular
Oh,
for
cool.
episodes that are set in different eras. It's like, sometimes you're juggling, okay, let's, like, I'm writing the script, or the first draft of the script is done, probably, yeah, the first draft of the script is done, but we have stuff that's set in a bar, in a hotel lobby bar, and so the diner, there was nothing ever set in the diner. She was a bartender
Mm. Oh,
originally.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And so, but then, we're going on scouts, and it's like, it's set in 49. So what sets do we have access to that will, that are in that era that we can use, that fit in our schedule? So there's a lot of balls up in the air. So
Sure.
it's very valuable to have the writer there who can go, okay, we can make her a waitress, but then we're going to have to like finagle this and, change that. And, it's just, that's the life of an episode of TV, is that you're always kind of doing that back and forth of like budget, circumstance, trying to make
Yeah.
the story work.
Just on this episode, were there, because if I'm being completely honest, the idea of her being a bartender, for whatever reason, just in my head, does not actually speak to me as well as her being, the waitress in the diner. I don't know why, but it doesn't. I think there's something lovely about the, again, and I doubt this was intentional, but there are certainly fans of the classic series that would immediately think of like Mirror Image and the bartender in that episode and what they represented to Sam and whatnot. But for me, I don't know. There's something about yeah, there's just something about the idea of her being a bartender that I'm sort of like, so that said, was there anything that kind of came up or any feedback along the way that you felt like, oh, this is definitely not what I want? How do I, how do we fix this, or how do we put this in, in a different way that will actually work? Like any difficult choices that had to be made?
Ooh, no, I can't think of anything offhand. It's like
Yeah,
you try not to be bogged down in like, oh, I didn't get to do this,
sure.
because you would have a terrible time because
Right.
constantly being told what you can't do and what you need to adjust, and you it's your job to make it work,
Right.
I had written her as a bartender in a in a hotel lobby bar,
Hmm.
you know and then you change it and you tweak the dialogue, and you tweak some of the action scenes. It was, the scene where Ben comes out of the hotel, right? He was originally meant to come downstairs from the hotel, see her in the lobby bar, and go
Sure,
in.
okay.
I was like, okay, well, how do we logistically and visually do the same thing? And I was like, well, let's park his car in front of the diner.
Yeah.
Let's speak that dialogue. She waves. It's just like, it's always trying to find those things that I was like, oh, it still reads as believable. It still works, but you're constantly making those adjustments, and it's not just character, it's story and, all of
Yeah.
it.
I think one of the lessons here today is that flexibility and practicality are just as much a part of the art as anything else. So not to harp on it, but it really does intrigue me for some reason. Did the character, did she change at all for you from going from a bartender to a waitress, or was it kind of just basically the same, just a different occupation?
Basically the same, just a different occupation. The waitress is more of a trope, so that is literally, it was like, but you make it work, and you don't make, she's not a stereotype by any means.
No,
So,
definitely not.
ultimately we didn't really need to worry about that. But it's just like the character of the 1940s waitress. There's a stereotype there. But then,
Yeah.
but then you take on that challenge and you go, well, I'm going to work against that, and you make sure,
Yes.
you don't fall into any of those tropes. So
Yeah.
try to do
Is there anything else about the episode that you feel like this interviewer has completely missed and that you want to talk about, or anything else that that was fun for you to work on, or a challenge to work on this episode?
No, I don't think so. I think it was like, how do we get the most bang for our buck in terms of alien and UFO and, you know, and uh, traveling in the 1950s in car scenes. It was interesting for me, as well. It's just like,
Yeah.
I think our director Chris Grisma pulled in some of his like fantastic, sci-fi creature, friends. They'd made this excellent prosthetic kind of mask, for the alien, and and made those the green goggles.
Nice.
And it's always interesting. I was like, okay, the military base. Well, we can't afford a military base. Use this blank, empty black stage and some interesting lights and smoke and curtains and VFX, and it's
Right.
just, you make it work, and Chris Grisma is fantastic at that. You wouldn't
Yeah.
know we're just on stage.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it definitely works. And I mean, he is fantastic. And, something else I always try to notice too is just the way that the episodes are put together and the pacing of the episodes. And I know that Piper Cruz, who we got the chance to speak to last season, edited this episode. And I think that that's something else about the episode, is that it feels like there's a movement to the episode that it feels propulsive, but it also knows when to take a break. And I think that that's also the writing, obviously, is it's like, when you're kind of figuring out the rhythms of the story. And there's a really lovely rhythm to this episode, in spite of stuff, like you say, kind of ending up on the cutting room floor. But I think that that's part of it too, right? Is
Absolutely.
that, sometimes you have to know what to keep out, or what to keep and what to take out. What without saying anything specific, what do you think of the upcoming episodes, which are 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8? What do you think your favorite of that bunch is?
Okay, I have to think in my head, like, what this is 3. Okay, 4. Okay, 5. Okay. Oh no, it's hard. 6.
Yeah.
7. Oh no, it's really, no, because it's like, as I've said so many times before, it's the delight of going somewhere new every week. And
Yeah.
I think what is so strong about this first 8 episodes is they're all so different.
Yeah.
They're really different, and they're different worlds. And it's exciting. We're gonna go. I don't want to give it. I can't give anything away. I'm gonna get in trouble.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's really delightful in not just like the extreme, like different places, different time, but also like the tone, and it's just like there's
Mm,
this, we're gonna, talk about things that have happened in recent history that are devastating, and tell a personal story about that. But then we're also going to do some really fantastical adventure stuff, and then we're going to like dabble in another genre as well. It's just like, aside from my, X-Files UFO episode, there's going to be another one coming up that'll be really fun. So, yeah, they're all just so delightful for, their differences.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly the sense that I've gotten. And, just from seeing the first five and what little I know about 6, 7, and 8, yeah, it feels like there is a range and a scope
Mhm.
to this collection of episodes that frankly does kind of outstrip anything that was done in season 1, really, when you
Mhm.
think about just from episode to episode. So it's incredible. And, I think y'all are doing a fantastic job.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
Martin and Dean have both done such a great job in kind of identifying what worked in season one and kind of just amplifying it moving forward,
Yeah.
So, it's a credit to them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, and going back to again, like the change in circumstance for our characters, it really has raised the emotional stakes, which is surprising to say when you consider that the first season was based around someone leaping through time to try to save their fiance's life, and yet in some manner, it's like emotionally, I feel more engaged with these characters than I even did in season 1. And I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a big fan, unabashed big fan of season 1, so it's just
Mhm.
been really gratifying to see where they've been taken so far in season 2.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Romy, thank you so much for being here. I really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wonderful to have you back, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Nice
well,
seeing you,
take
Sam.
care. Yeah, nice seeing you too. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much to Romy Loor for joining Fate's Wide Wheel for the interview about Closure Encounters. Always a pleasure to speak with her. Had a lot of fun doing this interview. I think you could tell by the laughter, but incredibly insightful as well, and just wonderful stuff. Not only specific to this episode or specific to Quantum Leap, but just about screenwriting for television in general, and some really really wonderful stuff about that. So hopefully you've been able to learn a little something, not just about our beloved show, but in general, or reaffirm things that maybe you already knew. Either way, I really, really am grateful to Romy for sharing some time with the podcast, and of course with all of you by way of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being here. I am grateful for that. I'm really appreciative. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, find me over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. But always hit up the YouTube channel for the latest. I always drop everything first here, and then generally a day or two later, the podcast will drop. Sometimes it happens in concert, but mostly I've been waiting a couple of days on the podcast. So head over to the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, comment below. It's always a lot of fun. Thank you so much to all of the Patreon subscribers. I really, really cannot thank you all so much. I'm grateful for you. Again, my usual spiel, but it's not just a spiel because I believe it desperately, especially with the state of the world as it is right now. Please make sure you're giving back to your communities. Find ways to volunteer if you are not in a position to donate financially. Give whatever you possibly can, and also, on the flip side of that, don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. I'm grateful for all of the kindness that's been shown to me, and I certainly want to try to put that out back into the world. I will always name check two of my favorite charities, the Trevor Project and Doctors Without Borders. If you want to help the world at large, those are two excellent charities that you can give to. And naturally, if after all that you want to throw a little cash my way, I'm grateful. It helps to keep the lights on. There's hosting fees, etc., etc., to pay for. So head over to patreon.com/Fates Wide Wheel for more information on that. You will get access to the Discord. You'll get access to the watch parties. That's what I'm trying to say. And you will, of course, as soon as things kind of get set up, which should be within the next week, you'll get early access to some of the interviews. In fact, there will be a special interview coming this weekend that Patreon subscribers will have early access to. everything will always go out there. You're not going to miss anything from me. If you're interested, if it has to do with Quantum Leap or beyond, it will always, always, always go out publicly on YouTube. But Patreon subscribers will kind of get first crack at it. So you're going to get an exclusive, well, I don't know if you're going to get an exclusive look at an interview that I am doing this weekend prior to anyone else, if you are a Patreon subscriber. So thank you so much for that support. It really, really means a lot and blows me away. I'm still kind of baffled by it sometimes, so I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much. It's kind of like a stamp of validation in some ways, and we all need that. So thank you. I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for all of that, and for all of you. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for watching, for listening, for talking. For helping, for being kind, being a part of this wonderful, wonderful fandom. Take care of yourselves, take care of one another, stay safe out there, and remember, always, always leap responsibly.